I'd like to take a look at a Blu-ray a friend of mine recently put out because it's a project that I wholeheartedly believe in. The Blu-ray is called Cartoon Roots. It's a collection of cartoons from the early days of animation. And when I say early days, I mean before the Looney Tunes and before Popeye and even before Disney. So here's why I think this is important. One of the first things that comes to most people's minds when they think of early animation is a black and white image of Mickey Mouse from Steamboat Willie. That's because Disney has become such a huge, influential company, and many have seen that imagery on a barrage of Disney products. But there was a whole world of animation that happened prior to the debut of Mickey. Disney itself had an entire series called Alice Comedies that was a mixture of live action and animation. But even more forgotten than that are all the other non-Disney cartoons. Characters like Dinky Doodle, Crazy Cat, Farmer Alfalfa, Bobby Bumps, and a whole slew of others that have become virtually forgotten. And that's where Tommy Stathis comes in. Tommy has been collecting silent cartoons on 16mm for over a decade, amassing one of the largest collections of early silent animation in the world. Now, for the first time, he's unleashing his treasure trove of forgotten early animation to the public. This collection is preserving the birth of animation for generations to come, and should really be something on every animation enthusiast's shelf. It was in these early silent films where many animation legends got their starts. There was Earl Hurd. Before he was a storyman for Disney's Snow White, he was busy bringing the bratty Bobby Bumps to audiences. You may not have heard of Bobby Bumps, but he was wildly popular in the silent era. The character is a young boy that's always getting into some kind of mischief. So film historians typically refer to him as the Bart Simpson of silent animation. The Bobby Bumps series was directed by Earl Hurd, who invented the cell process for animation in 1915, making this one of the most historically significant cartoon series in animation history. Walter Lantz is best known for his most famous character, which was at its height during the golden age of animation, Woody Woodpecker. But over 20 years earlier, a very young Lantz was cutting his teeth on animation in the early New York City animation studios. At first, he was animating Jerry on the Job cartoons in the late 1910s at the International Film Service and eventually wound up at Bray Studios, where he began working on Colonel He's a Liar cartoons out of the early 20s. And just to make the distinction so there's no confusion, I'm talking about the animation Bray, which is totally a different thing than the Hammer Studios Bray that made Dracula and all those horror movies in the 70s. Anyway, eventually, Walter Lantz became a major director at Bray, where he developed his own series, Dinky Doodle. Building on the popularity of Max Fleischer's Coco the Clown, where a cartoon character existed in and interacted in a live-action world, Walter Lantz created the Dinky Doodle character as a little boy who gets into a fairy tale and contemporary adventures with his sidekick dog, Weakheart. In this entry of Lantz's early series, Dinky finds himself involved as a hero in a classic stage play-like kidnapping of a woman by a gruff bad guy. There was also Preston Blair, who animated Red Hot Riding Hood. You may be interested to see where he began, animating Binko the Bear Cub in Hot Toe Molly, a short cartoon with off-color gags in a Mexican cantina. The Romer Gray studio, which produced this, had been an obscure footnote in animation history for years, but their films were considered lost forever until it was rediscovered a couple years back. This release is the first public availability of the film since it was originally made. There's even a Colonel He's a Liar cartoon on this set. Why is that important? Well, that was the first cartoon character created specifically for the cinema screen in 1913 by pioneer animator and successful studio head J.R. Bray. There were two series of the He's a Liar cartoons, and this is one from the second series in the 1920s. It uses clever storytelling and editing techniques to make up a fun and unusual film. Then there's Lightning Sketches, which is an early chalk talk film by J. Stuart Blackton, who can be called the forefather of American film animation. Blackton appears in this film as himself, a vaudeville performer, sketching gags on a sheet of paper and then using in-camera editing and other editing techniques to animate the drawings and make them appear to be alive. This type of trick film was astonishing to audiences in 1907. Another famous silent animated series was the Aesop's Fables by Paul Terry. Terry's studio produced nearly 450 fables throughout the 1920s. That's nearly one a week, which was a record pace and unrivaled by any other cartoon studio. Terry later formed Terry Toons, which featured the famous Mighty Mouse cartoons and Heckle and Jekyll. This is a particularly rude entry, showing that some cartoons were definitely intended for adult audiences even a century ago. You also get an early example of the directing style of Jack King with the cartoon Sense and Nonsense. If you don't know Jack King, he directed many of the classic Donald Duck shorts. Here, he directs a Crazy Cat silent film, where Crazy is trying to catch animals to skin. This is an important cartoon because it's one of the few examples of a silent Crazy Cat cartoon to exist, since all the negatives for much of this series was intentionally destroyed in the 1940s, as the distributor thought that they no longer had any value. But here, on Cartoon Roots, we're fortunate enough to see a surviving print. Now, there's many other great cartoons and bonus material on this set to enjoy as well. Cartoon Roots was compiled by an indie label. It's not like Looney Tunes Blu-ray sets, like Golden Collection and all that, which are backed by a major studio like Warner Brothers with a large budget. This was done by a group of friends out of their homes. So supporting this type of endeavor by getting the Blu-ray is important to keep more releases like this coming. And I hope more releases like this can happen because while Tommy does screen films from his collection in the New York City area, more of these endearing silent gems need to be seen again by a worldwide audience through the use of home video releases.